Hey, Adam Gower here of gowercrowd.com, and in today's podcast you are in for a real treat because I'm going to be talking to Chris Mercer of measurementmarketing.io. Now, heads up and word of slight caution, this is going to be a somewhat technical podcast because what Mercer, actually goes by the name of Mercer, not Chris. What Mercer specializes in is Google Analytics and how to track your prospects' journey as they move through your content, through your website, on their path to investing with you. It is absolutely fascinating. I've become completely addicted to Google Analytics, and of course, they are changing everything up this next July. And so what I talked to Mercer about today is what are those changes? How do we use them? How do we benefit from them? And what we can do with them to raise more capital. That's what you're going to learn about today. Go to the podcast page for today's episode at gowercrowd.com because we're also going to be holding a special training session with Mercer in a few weeks. You're welcome to sign up for that and join us. It's going to be a special session for our Inner Circle members, open to everybody. It's always on a Thursday at noon Pacific, and on the podcast page I will include a link to joining us for that session, or if you missed it, there will be a link to access the recording. And of course, while you're there at gowercrowd.com, go to the top of the page if you're not already a subscriber to our newsletter, and go ahead and sign up. It's totally free. It goes out every Wednesday, has the latest and greatest news from the real estate syndication industry, with the only website that actually covers it in as much detail. All there at gowercrowd.com. Don't forget to subscribe. All right, let's get into it. Mercer, he's an amazing guy. You're going to love what he has to say. He's incredibly knowledgeable, speaks at about 1,000 words a minute, and this is an information-packed podcast. Here we go. Mercer, it's so good to see you again. I don't know how long it's been. It's been at least 3-4 years or something since the last time we recorded a podcast. It's taken me, I just want you to know, it has taken me that entire time to actually get quite comfortable with Google Analytics and dependent on it. And the last week I saw, oh my God, they're changing it up completely.
They were waiting for you, man. They're like, okay, he's finally got it. Let's go ahead and flip it out to the new version now. Yep, exactly.
That is exactly what's happened. Yeah, it's like literally taken me 3 years to become completely addicted and semi-capable on Google Analytics. And now it's changing up again. So I'll tell you what, Mercer, why don't we start? Let's start at the very, very top. You live and breathe Google Analytics, but there's one guy in the audience who's got no idea what you're talking about. And so for his benefit,
absolutely,
just tell me, what is Google Analytics and how is it used?
Absolutely. So analytics is really, it's a platform that Google bought years and years ago, essentially to help us as marketers measure our site's performance so we can kind of listen into the conversation that's happening between the website and the users. And that's really all it comes down to. So are we having the conversation that we think we're having with our users? And that's one of the tools in sort of the arsenal that's available to us as measurement professionals to be able to do that. So the original Google Analytics is kind of being referred to nowadays as universal analytics. And that was sort of an upgrade. And that's what they've been doing. Google's done a really good job of upgrading this platform. But the way I think about it is it's kind of like an old Model T Ford. Like no matter how much you love that car, it was not built for today's roads. It wasn't built for the city. It wasn't built for driving at 80 miles an hour. And like in Texas, we have 80 miles an hour as a speed limit. So it's really fast. It wasn't built for lots of traffic. It wasn't built for lots of advanced stuff. Doesn't have the best safety features. And no matter what you do to your Model T, you cannot upgrade it enough because the frame is off. It needs to be completely rebuilt. So the way that I think about Google Analytics 4, and that's kind of what they did too, is they said, listen, we need to rebuild Google Analytics from scratch. No more patching and updating and building upon. We're going to sort of etch-a-sketch this thing. So they erase it all and they rebuild, knowing how measurement is today. If you think about it, like even your Nest thermostats have access to the internet and you can measure that stuff. People have iOS apps and Android apps. That stuff didn't exist when analytics was first created. They had no idea that was going to be a thing.
Interesting.
And then we have a very different view of the future. So I think about it, instead of that Model T, it's one of those fancy like survival pickups that you can drive anywhere, and it doesn't need roads anymore. And it's got all the fancy bells and whistles, and it's got little, bathroom and water purification. It's got all this cool stuff so you can survive whatever. And even if you don't need those features, it's got them. That's kind of the benefit of Google Analytics 4.
All right. So you've used a lot of analogies. Let's actually use specific examples of how it's used. But, it suddenly occurred to me, because you're such an expert in this field, I should have asked you the first off before we even started. Who are you? What do you do? What's measurement marketing? How come you are the world expert in Google Analytics?
This is just how far back we go. That's all it is. We're just super comfortable with each other. We're like, of course they know us.
I totally forgot to ask that. So go ahead. Tell us.
No problem. So my name is Chris Mercer. Everybody calls me Mercer because there's always another Chris in the room. And the company that I co-founded is called measurementmarketing.io. And it's our job to help marketers understand kind of what their numbers are, how to find the numbers, and what to do with the numbers so they can grow their marketing, improve their marketing results. That's really what we do. And we do that by training them how to do it, starting with a measurement strategy and then moving into the actual tactical, like, here's how you do it with the free tools that Google's given us. Like in this case, Google Analytics 4, which is kind of the new kid on the block.
Okay. And there are other tools beyond Google Analytics. Please don't tell me there are, because I'm like overwhelmed with GA.
There's a whole wide world waiting for you, my friend. Whole wide world. Yeah, there's Tag Manager, there's Looker Studio, there's lots of different stuff that they offer in the realm of measurement. But you can start with Google Analytics 4, and that's the platform you should start with. Everybody should start with that, and then you grow into these other tools if and when they become necessary when you're asking different questions around your business.
All right. So when we do the official training, we talked to that before we started. Let's talk about, I would love to talk about some of those other tools. Tag Manager, I know, but there's some other things. At least knowing that they're there and what they do helps to know to look for them. If you don't even know they're there, you don't even know.
Exactly right.
All right. So you used a few analogies. The Ford motor car on a road of today, it's not suited. But give me some actual use cases for Google Analytics. And actually, let's try and do that the best as possible.
Absolutely.
By thinking about the use that real estate sponsors have. So what we do is we go out on social media. We put hundreds and thousands of posts on social media. We write articles. We do have good SEO. There's traffic to the website that way. We send out emails. There's all kinds of, we do paid advertising, and it attracts prospective investors to the website. So with that kind of broad sweep of what it is that we do and what we're looking for essentially as investors to come to us to invest in our deals, how do we use actual examples of what? And actually, we should talk about GA4. What's
exactly
it called?
Right.
GA4?
Yeah, Google Analytics 4. And so we can use GA4 for shorthand. A lot of people, it's kind of what they're defaulting to is GA4. Okay. And it keeps it easier in your head if you're like, which Google Analytics are we talking about, right? So GA4 is what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, and you can also, if you don't mind, you could also mention, I don't want to get too technical today, but you could also talk about it in the context of GA4. And the funny thing is, you even talked about it when we first met, and I thought, oh, that's so many years away. I'll never ever need to worry about that. And then here we are today. So in the context of how it's changed and how it's evolved, what is GA4 and how can we use it in a practical?
Absolutely. So again, it goes back to that conversation. Remember, the whole point of the website is because we can't be in front of every single prospect. So our website is. The website essentially is that salesperson that's helping move your user through whatever the user journey is. Like in your case with real estate, are they just kind of a looking around, or are they a serious investor, right? And you can tell by the behaviors, just like if it was a salesperson. If I reported back to you and I said, oh, I got a hot prospect, you're like, great, tell me about it. Like they came in and asked where the bathrooms were and everything. And you're like, they just want to use the bathrooms. They weren't a hot prospect. Like, what are you doing? And that's kind of what your site can do. It can report back based upon the behaviors of how they're interacting with the website. And so the older Google Analytics could do things like page views pretty easily, and it could tell you things like that. Hey, they walked through the door, therefore it must be good. And that's all it really could do. Google Analytics 4 is built for a very different conversation, a much more focused conversation. So you can actually set it up so it can tell you things. This is kind of the biggest beauty of it, I think, is what they call custom events. But essentially, imagine you going to a report that says, okay, show me how many prospects I had. And it says, here's how many prospects. Here's of those, how many showed that they were interested prospects. Well, how do we define that? Well, people that were clicking around and scroll down on our page to the bottom of the page. Google Analytics 4 can do that automatically. The old Google Analytics couldn't do that. You had to do some fancy stuff to get that working. This one does it automatically.
Hang on. I'm sorry. Say that again.
So imagine the behavior of coming into your blog post, like you mentioned before, right?
Right.
So I've written a blog post about this property. I want to know if the user was actually interested or not. So did they see the page? That's one thing, what they call the page view. That's good.
Right.
Did they scroll to the bottom though? Like that's an additional level of
behavior. GA4 can do that. So
out of the box. And that's what's important. It's out of the box. It'll do that.
That's really interesting. So the original one told you how long they spent on the page.
Well, that's also kind of a curious thing. Universal Analytics, the old one, didn't really know how to tell time. It guessed all the time. GA4 counts every second. It knows how to tell time. Because again, it was built from the ground up. It's a completely different vehicle. So it can do completely different things, which is kind of
wait a
nice
second. Sorry, I don't mean to split hairs or to argue. I'm not at all. I'm trying to understand. But when I look at Google Analytics, I can see how long somebody stayed on a page.
Right.
That was universal. Is it?
Yeah, it's the way that it did it. To get just a tiny bit technical, is everything in Universal Analytics they called a hit. So it would get one page view, and then it would get another page view. Right. And each one of those page views had a timestamp. Then it would calculate the difference between those.
Right. So what
if it gets one page view and then no other hit? It has nothing else to measure against, so it goes 0 time. And that was not correct. It wasn't 0 time. It's just that it had no idea how much time, so it said 0, which affected your averages, right? So what you're seeing in there, the trends and patterns are probably useful, but they're not they're not at all useful.
And the other thing that I always wondered about Universal, and I've always wondered as I've been using it, is when you do see those times, especially when it's a longer time, did they just open the page and then work on something else and then come back to the page? I'll have browser windows open for hours.
Yeah.
And then come back and
it could have been
navigate from it.
Yeah. And that's kind of where we move back into GA4, right? Because they knew that these issues were there. But again, it's an old platform. At this point, they have to rebuild it from scratch in order to get these fancier features that are the normal behaviors that we want to measure for now. They're not advanced behaviors. Like scroll's not advanced. Clicks aren't advanced. Watching a YouTube video that's embedded on your page, maybe like a tour of the property, that's not advanced. That's just kind of how the internet marketing works now, right? Like everybody does that with digital, in the digital marketing world. So they built this platform to say, okay, you put the code on the page, and yes, you'll see page views like you're used to. You will also see when they scroll to the bottom of the page, you will see when they click on a link that leaves your site, so we can tell you where they were going. Really? You will see those YouTube videos as they play. If you have an embedded video on your blog post, did they play that? And now if you think about it, again, think about a sales perspective. You're trying to qualify the prospect. Is this a serious investor or not? And I've got one investor who saw the page and left within 10 seconds because GA4 knows time. So you can say, hey, if it's less than 10 seconds, call them disengaged. And there's the other one who stayed 10 seconds, scrolled to the bottom of the page, watched the video halfway through. That's what GA4 can tell you. Those are two completely different prospects. Which one do you want to retarget? Right. And that's where it goes, oh, okay, I can identify the right people faster. I can feed that into another platform like Google Ads to, which obviously is why Google's giving this away for free because they want us to spend money on ads. But if it's helping to make the audience quality better, they now know who to target. They know for building their own lookalikes. So the whole thing sort of feeds upon itself, but it's better quality data. It's a more useful story. So you can take your marketing actions a little bit faster than you could with Universal in the past. And that's really, again, that's the beauty. It does this out of the box. They call it automatic events in GA4, but it automatically happens. In fact, you have to turn that stuff off. And then recently they just added form submissions. So when somebody submits a form, it'll tell you that too. So they're constantly trying to push the limit of what they can do without you having to do anything. And then, of course, if you want more fancy stuff, you can still add on other tools like Tag Manager and things like that.
Well, yes,
out of the box, GA4 is amazing.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a whole raft of kind of random questions there, just because you've said so much that like made me think, okay, well, hang on. So, for example, like the forms, when you talk about forms, so when we do Google Ads, we do embed a tag onto a thank you page. And that registers as a conversion. So somebody fills out the form, we know it's conversion. How is GA4 different then?
It's not. Remember, two different platforms. So Google Ads is doing it for conversions and audience building and targeting, so they can go out and get you more prospects to your site, right? So they're using it for that reason, completely separate than Google Analytics. But you still want to be able to go into Google Analytics, and maybe you can build like a funnel, if you imagine that, like a funnel report, which you can do. Again, they've completely revamped what the reports look like. It's a completely different interface, and I want to emphasize completely different. The only thing it shares in common with the old Google Analytics is the name. That's it. Everything else is different. And there's a lot of people that are there's a deadline of July 1st when Universal stops working. So for those of you who are listening to this, like, look at the calendar. July 1st, the old analytics stops working. You can see what's there, but that's it. Exactly. July 1st, 2023. So it's months away. It's a really short period of time that you have. And then there's a lot of people who are thinking, oh, I'll just start it on July 2nd. And because they're thinking it's like it was last time, where you sort of upgraded and it looked the same and it was easy to use. It was just better. This is a completely different platform, completely different report.
When I log into
different way of thinking.
When I log into Google Analytics now, am I seeing GA4? Am I seeing the?
You're seeing Universal. You're seeing.
I am still seeing.
You have to create an entire. It is a completely separate platform. In fact, you run both at the same time right now until the other one stops. That's how you do that. So it is a completely separate platform, and it looks radically different. And I'm emphasizing that to make sure that message gets across. Do not think, oh, I know Universal. I'm an expert in Universal. Because your expert skills in Universal, 10% of them translate to GA4.
Oh, this is good news.
The rest of it, you've got to rebuild. So I appreciate all that work you put into over the years.
For the last 3 years.
So at least you've got those skills, right?
But 10% of the
10% of them are going to carry over to GA4 because you have to think completely differently.
All right, so we're definitely so when we do this training at Mercer, you're going to be able to show me GA4 even before July, obviously.
Absolutely, you're going to need it because you got to get started.
Otherwise, we can't use it. Okay,
absolutely
good.
right.
All right, we're going to book that very soon, and let's get as many people in as possible. Can we? So, again, these are kind of random questions because I'm all over the place, which is why I want to do the training with you. First question. So you mentioned, can we see sites that people off ramp to? Can we? We'll be able to show
not the site, but
where they went.
Yeah, exactly. Let's say you have an Amazon link or something on your site, like if you're an affiliate marketer, which I know is not in real estate, but maybe, right? Maybe it's like, oh, go buy this rug on Amazon, get that at your house or something. Yeah. You click on that link and it takes them to Amazon. Google Analytics 4 will report that. It'll say, hey, there was a click, what they call an outbound click, and they left to go to Amazon. Here's the link they clicked on. Here's the page they were on when they clicked that link. So you can see all sorts of information to make sure that essentially your marketing or that the website itself is working the way it's supposed to, that it's having the conversation that it's supposed to.
That's interesting. But it won't show me if they open another browser and if they don't click from my site to go somewhere, I won't be able to see.
Correct. If they open a completely separate tab, it's a different journey. Exactly. So analytics isn't connected if I just open up a new tab and go to a different site.
Interesting. But if, let's say, for example, if I've got backlinks on a page, it will show me that they clicked on those links.
If they're going to other sites, yes. As long as they're leaving your site and going to a different site, then it would show that. Absolutely.
That's kind of interesting. Okay.
And it's nice because it's automatic. I want to emphasize that. You just put the code on the page and that stuff starts working. That's a huge, massive difference.
Put the code on the page. Platform. Is it the same as putting a tag site-wise like we do currently? Yes, that's
exactly right. That's exactly right. In fact, it might, depending upon which version of analytics you have, the analytics script itself, you look at it and if it says G tag, that's how you know you're using the right one. There's an older version called analytics.js you would see in the code.
No,
that one doesn't work. Then G tag will automatically, it should carry over. And we can talk about how to do that in the course too. And there's pros and cons to that.
Will GA4 show historical data from July 23rd or July, whenever it is, or will it all start fresh? Will it look back and say, okay?
Start because remember, they're completely different platforms, right? Completely.
But it won't read from Universal and say, okay, we see all this.
It's not going to import everything into its database because it is complete. Like they call it data schema. It's basically just a fancy term for how the data is organized. Okay. And it's quite literally like different languages. So French really well, and then we go, great, here's German. And so obviously you can work around German with your French. Some of it, yes, but only about 10% of it. You're gonna have to learn German too in order to be fluent. And that's the difference. That's how to think about these two platforms. They are different languages. So you really shouldn't connect one into the other because they're completely different platforms. Remember, old Model T, you can only do so much with it. And GA4, cool, fancy new car. Let's treat it like a cool, fancy new car it is. Don't drive it like a Model T, right? Because you're not, if you only drive it 30 miles an hour, you're not going to get much from it. So you want to use the platform for what it wants to be used. So we're big fans of just installing it and treating it like it is a separate platform. You're going to get a lot more from it, but you do have to think differently a little bit.
So I've started getting for the first time error messages for videos. I forget exactly what it says. Is that it's almost based on what you've just said now, it almost feels like it's asked, because we look at this and think, no, it's like, why is this a problem? We've never had this problem before. Why is it a problem? And I forget exactly what it says. It's somehow the page is not set up right somehow for videos. And we've never seen that before.
Is that for YouTube videos?
We embed videos on web pages.
Are they YouTube videos or Vimeo or what's
Vimeo?
Do you know?
I think the ones that's pinging are Vimeo. It might be YouTube. I haven't really looked at it because
it sounds more. It wouldn't be related to analytics at all.
It's not.
It shouldn't be. That just sounds like a more of a developer, standard developer issue with the way that maybe the embed is happening.
Okay, it's just
what you're using for it.
Okay,
but it's not. It has anything to do with Google Analytics. It
but if it's YouTube videos, it's going to watch playtime and all kinds of things.
It'll let you know when they start playing and then percentages through. Vimeo, it won't do it on its own. You would have to use a tool like Tag Manager to help it out, because it doesn't know how to speak that language of Vimeo. Obviously, they know YouTube, right? Because they own YouTube. So they speak well with their own platforms, but a different language, you're going to have to bring in Tag Manager to help translate some of that. It's possible, just need other tools.
And can you trigger reaction? Can you trigger, this is kind of complicated and really does betray my knowledge of my lack of knowledge of GA4, but can you trigger actions based on people's behavior? So let's say I identify, for just the simplest example, somebody goes to a 5,000 word article on my page and we watch them scrolling through at a steady pace. Can I trigger an action to that person based on what GA4 is analyzing? Like say, okay, they spent 3 minutes, they got all the way to the bottom, therefore do this, like send an email or put up flash something in front of them, or can I do that? Or is it
great question. I would, in the beginning, right? We're big fans of like get good enough to get going. You can do some fancier stuff like that with Tag Manager because it's really good at understanding time. And you can say, if it's been 3 minutes and they scroll to the bottom and they're still on the page, then tell Google Analytics 4, this is a hot prospect and put them in this audience, right? You probably will need a tool like Tag Manager to fine tune the behaviors. That's Tag Manager. But out of the box, if you weren't using Tag Manager yet, and believe me, do not try to learn Google Analytics 4 and Tag Manager at the same time. It's way too much. Start with GA4, get really good at GA4. But you could tell GA4 when a scroll happens, which means 90% of the way, that's when it fires that, automatically knows that, it's listening for that. When a scroll happens on this page, let's call that hot prospect. And then we tag them, we put them the audience of hot prospects. That audience is linked to Google Ads. And now Google Ads is automatically sending out different ads to the hot prospects. That's like, hey, I've only got 3 more spots left. If you want to invest, now's the time where the investment's closing in 7 days. They see those messages because it makes more sense to them because they showed some interest in that particular post, right? So that's how it works. And again, out of the box, you can do a really good job, certainly 100% more than you could do with Universal Analytics.
But if I know who the user is and I know what their email is, I've got another question related to that. Sure. If I know who they are, I've identified them, they've completed a lead gen form on my website, and I want to know who are the top 10 people who have been active on my website today because I want to send them an email. Can I integrate GA4 with like an email, a customer relationship management tool like HubSpot or something else? Could I trigger something to say, okay, this person with this email address is one of the top most active people on your website, send them this email. Can I do that?
In a way, yes. But the reason I caution it is because you cannot store personally identifiable information, right? So an email address is personally identifiable. I know who you are. You cannot store that in Google Analytics. but you could store like a user ID or something
Yeah.
else, right? But in reality, what I would probably do is I would just use HubSpot to answer that. Say, hey, who's clicking on these links? Because presumably they're interacting with the thing. And if they've clicked a bunch of those things, then maybe you could just say to HubSpot, listen, they're super engaged. That's who I want to see. Now, if you want to tie that to behaviors that are happening on the site, again, you can, but it's a little bit fancier of a setup. They call it user ID, and that's how you're connecting the dots between those platforms. But it's a little bit more advanced to do it. Possible. I just wouldn't start with that immediately.
Okay.
Not to really are
it is really advanced, and we do build things like this, but we have to kind of patch things together to make
That's exactly right.
We're able to do it. And we need to do a bit of coding as well to identify.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you do.
But I was just wondering how far GA4 goes.
You know, I'll tell you, a simple way you could do that would be familiar with UTMs, right? How we track our tags of traffic. If you put like a merge field of the user, not the email, because you can't store the email, but a merge field of the user ID, HubSpot's user ID, and you put that in that URL in one of your UTMs, then you can say, I want to see the UTM content. Maybe that's where you're putting it. And then you can see the actual ID number, the contact ID, and what they did. And then you go, then you go back to HubSpot, show up, look at 1, 2, 3, 4, and go, oh, okay, that's John Doe or Jane.
So we've been doing, we did set up a bunch of tracking tools that do exactly that. It uses the user. In fact, and when we're going into Universal, looking at the user ID, it's not supposed to be identifiable, but you can see by user ID, and then we can find out, okay, who was that user? It's a bit manual,
right?
We are able to,
and that might work at depending what the business is, right? If you only have a few of those a day, that might work. If you have tens of thousands a day, you're gonna have to automate it.
Impractical, but we were able to create hot lists. So we could say we could always see who's been the most active on by email, by name in the last 2 weeks. Who's the most active on the website? But anyway, I was just curious, but it took a lot of coding and it was a bit cumbersome.
And sometimes there's easier ways. Like, again, we're really big, and this happens in our own company too, right? We have the saying of like, get good enough to get going, then come back and make it better later.
Yeah.
And what'll happen is sometimes we'll be talking about stuff. And then finally somebody's like, listen, are we making the better version of this before we even get the first version out? And we're like, you know what? We are, never mind. Let's just do it the easy way, get some momentum, get some progress, and then get feedback. And that feedback that you get goes, oh, actually, we're on the right target. Cool, let's keep going this way. But sometimes the feedback is like, you should make a left, don't go this way.
Exactly. It tells you what direction to go in. That's one of the problems that we've had here at Gower Crowd is, the way I think of it, is just being far too clever. I don't mean that immodestly.
For us as well.
Like you build these sit down and build these incredibly robust, super sophisticated, multi-branched funnels, and then nobody ever shows up.
Right. Okay. Exactly. You're like, let's just get the landing page working first. We'll add on the rest.
Let's get the landing page and see if anyone shows up. Then we'll start figuring out if we need more. All right. So how is it going to enhance advertising, Mercer?
Great question. So again, you have that audiences feature where you can say, okay, here's the hot prospect, put them in the hot prospect audience and link into Google Ads automatically, which is already a win because you can do that. But just the idea of being able to segment based on behaviors that are happening on the site, and the behaviors are more detailed than here's the pages they saw. It's again, it knows time. So it can measure if they were there more than 10 seconds, what they call an engaged session. So you're like, okay, I know they were more than 10 seconds. Did they then scroll? Did they watch the video? If they did, put them in hot prospects. If they scrolled but didn't watch the video, put them in the warm prospects. If they weren't even there more than 10 seconds, put them in cold prospects. Maybe we'll remark it gently to them, but they're probably not our real people. So that's one way is that you can help separate by behavior, not what they said they were going to do or what they were into, what they're actually doing on your site. And they self-select based upon those behaviors. And that's how I think the kind of the first step to GA4 is taking a step back and thinking about the strategy. Like, okay, what is our user journey? What is the site supposed to do? If it were a salesperson, what is it supposed to do in terms of the behaviors it's supposed to elicit? And we all know, of course, it wants to go to the contact or the ultimate purchase event or whatever that thing is, but it also has all these other micro conversion sales along the way. It's got to get them interested. It's got to get them engaged. It's got to make them aware, right? So we have a thing called ACE results, where you measure for the awareness when they complete the journey and when they engage along the way. So GA4 is kind of built to do that, which is really nice. And it does a lot of that, at least generally speaking, out of the box automatically. And then the fancier stuff you can add on later with Tag Manager, if and when that time comes for you. But out of the box, it does that. And that self-selecting ability for the prospect to sort of, GA4 is listening to all the behaviors and goes, okay, this one's a cold prospect. Here's a warm prospect. Here's a hot prospect. That already is a game changer, because you really couldn't do that in Google in the older Universal Analytics.
Okay, and now you can put things directly in front of ads directly in front of hot prospects.
Exactly, and it integrates completely. Yeah, everything in Google is completely integrated now. They've done a pretty good job of bringing it all in house and under one roof. So all of a sudden, I go to YouTube and now I'm seeing maybe your real estate, another property that you have that becomes an ad. So you might have and I'm starting to see a lot of these where I see like these long form 30-minute ads that pop up. And it's just, and even 10-minute or 15-minute ads, and they're tours of stuff because I showed interest on the site. So they're like, okay, that property didn't work, but hey, I'm an investor, or at least I want to be, right? If nothing else. And so you know that behavior. So people will put those commercials up on YouTube. Well, that's only happening because something told Google Ads, hey, this person probably should see that.
Put it in front of this person.
Right. And if it's relevant, right, like a tour like that, we're getting some fascinating results people are getting with long form ads, which if you think about it is the opposite direction that people think would happen. You think everyone's got a 30-second attention span that's now down to 3 seconds, right? Because TikTok has ruined everybody's brain. So it's like, all right, well, yes, for awareness, I think that's true. If you're just trying to get attention, you have nanoseconds now to get attention. But when you have their attention, if they're the right audience, you can have a conversation. And if people will invest the time, effort, and energy in that, that's a pretty good prospect.
Yeah, it's like, makes me think of the older infomercials.
Yes.
There were half an hour, for the bull worker.
Yep. That's exactly right. And if you think about it, that was the traffic that the TV station person was like, what? Like, why would you want this? It's
why would anyone?
I mean, we're not doing anything with it anyway. We shut off the lights. That's what they were doing at midnight. They would shut off the lights. Remember those bars used to show? Like, I remember those days, right? We probably both remember those days of where TV wasn't 24/7. But all of a sudden that unused inventory started creating a lot of sales. They went, wow, like this is kind of crazy. But there's a huge market of people who are awake overnight. So,
all right, so let me ask you a couple more questions. Like, of course, we're like insane. I could talk to you for hours, and I do want to actually, but we'll take care of that later.
Love it.
What is the impact of GA4 on SEO? This is sounding very technical, isn't it? It's all these blooming acronyms, but sorry if anyone's listening and it's a little bit beyond, definitely come to GowerCrowd.com. I don't do enough promoting of the site, but do, because we're going to do a formal training with Mercer and we'll get into it in detail. But what is the impact of GA4 on SEO?
Good question. So technically none is how I would say that, with the exception that how could it not? Like if Google has the information about your site, it probably, like they say, doesn't have any. And that's probably mostly true. But at the same time, if you've got Google Analytics recording all the different pages, Search Console is crawling all those different pages, maybe there's no bleed over, but it makes sense that there could be some. That said, I would not install Google Analytics specifically to boost your search engine rankings. I don't think that would necessarily do it. I think good quality content does it. I think
that's the only thing. Google Analytics just maps what's going on.
That's exactly right. But on that note, how do you know if you have good quality content? Well, if you're looking in your Google Analytics and it shows scroll and time and they're watching the videos, that's also signals that that Search Console is seeing. You're like, well, I must be like that. That sort of raises that reputation. Right?
That's interesting.
Search Console too. And that's how I would use it to sort of say, well, if I'm seeing this, Google Search Console is also seeing that. The bots are seeing that. So maybe that does help.
That is interesting.
But it won't directly impact. Like there's not like a box you can check that will increase your search ranking because you're using.
No, it's how you use it.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And you can still connect Search Console into Google Analytics like you could with the old one. With GA4, you can still connect it in and you can see the search reports and the queries and all that fun stuff. You can still do that.
It's funny because you say Tag Manager is don't use Google Analytics. Use Google Analytics first and then use Tag Manager. But I've always seen them as being codependent, actually. Whenever we do anything, whenever we talk to clients, we have them set up Tag Manager for them and we set up GA. I've never seen them as being separate.
It depends on your skill. right? So that's for the person who's like, I don't even know what Tag Manager is. Now I got to learn that too. And I would be like, no, you don't. Not yet. You grow into it. So for example, Google Analytics 4, and this was different in Universal. In Universal, it just did page views. So if you wanted anything else, you have to use Tag Manager. So the ramp into Tag Manager was much shorter because you sort of had to get into it in order to get the fancier stuff like scroll. But Google Analytics 4 does that, but it only does 90%. So if you wanted to say, well, I want to see a scroll sort of report that shows me 10%, 25%, 50%, 75, and 90, that's where Tag Manager comes back in. And so, because Tag Manager can listen for the different depth of scroll, right? GA4 just measures 90%, that's it. Tag Manager would then change and you go, okay, I'm going to give Tag Manager control of it because Tag Manager can see the different nuances in the behaviors. And then that's why you would use Tag Manager. But again, for anybody who's starting out, don't do both. GA4 first, Tag Manager later, once you've got that, because what will happen is once you answer your first level of questions, you always see that second level. So the first level might be like, hey, are they even hitting the bottom of the page? And it's like, yeah, 90% of them are hitting 90% of the bottom of the page. You're like, okay, well, that's great. What about the other 10%? Where are they dropping off? Well, it can't tell you that. It can't tell you if they dropped off at 10% or at 50% or at 75% of the page because it doesn't know how to measure that. And that's where you bring in another tool like Tag Manager, who does know how to measure that. That's what it was built for. There's nuanced behaviors. Another example of Tag Manager versus Google Analytics 4 might be if you have, let's say the form is at the bottom of your page. Was the form itself, when they scrolled, did it show in the viewable browser window for at least 5 seconds? GA4 can't do that. Tag Manager is built to do that. So it can measure for that behavior and go, oh, okay, I see that's happening. I'm going to go tell Google Analytics 4 that they now viewed the form because it sat there for 5 seconds, right? Or they're investigating they're thinking about it. I can just tell GA4, hey, they're thinking about it right now. And then GA4 is going, cool, I'm going to go tell Google Ads to put them in this audience, right? And that's how they all start to work together. But if anyone's starting out, do not try to do all this at once because it's way too much. It's like, I'm going to learn a new language. And you're like, well, which one should I learn? Well, I want to learn German. Yeah, but there's France right there. And there's Spain right there. Okay, you know what? That's fine. I'm going to learn French and German and you know what, and Italian. And why not? I'll just do them all. And you're like, you're going to just confuse yourself.
There's no way.
One at a time.
I will tell you this also. There is, and our industry just isn't that complicated, you know, and the numbers are not that big. We have very few
general behaviors.
Yeah, that drive really massive traffic, but very, very rarely. And those are spending 150, 200,000 a month on advertising. So they, you know, the analytics really can kick in there. But for 99% of anybody in our industry, you just don't need to go that deep. All right, let's wrap
agree.
up.
Good enough to get going. That goes back to good enough to get going. Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah, just enough to just so that you can see what pages are working, where your traffic's coming from, just like some basic helpful information that's actionable immediately.
Exactly.
And then once you see that, then you think, okay, now I want to know a bit more because we're seeing better results because whatever, we acted on what we learned before. Let me ask you, I've got 3 rapid fire questions to finish up with, nothing at all to do with anything other than you personally.
All right, here we go.
Before I ask that, I've got one last question. I gotta ask about ChatGPT.
Yes.
What is that like? What is your how is that affecting your world?
It hasn't directly, but it absolutely will. Right? Hasn't directly yet. Absolutely will. It'll probably not be ChatGPT. It'll be Palm, which is Google's that. Right? Google's got just as much stuff as they do. And they just recently released it. It's called Bard. So Bard is their interface for that. Yeah, but they have this Palm thing that's going to be, they're already integrating it in Gmail. They're integrating it in Word doc or their version of Sheets, right? Docs.
Right.
Where I can say like, write me a job description about this. And it can just, but it'll put it in a doc, which is kind of where you want it anyway. Right.
Yes,
so I think that kind of makes sense. But they are very quickly rolling it out. My estimation, my guess would be it's not that far away where you will give a table or just tell Google, because they're going to have access to everything, right? Say, I will share my analytics data with them. And you can go to this Bard bot and say, again, I don't think ChatGPT, because they would have to get access to it. I don't know if they'll allow that. Maybe not. But Google could and say, okay, well, hey, Bard, I want you to go to my GA4. Let me know how yesterday went. And it tells you, and it goes, hey, that Facebook advertising is working really well. It seems to be working twice as well as blah, 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 blah. Now that'll be dependent upon the quality of your setup. So if you set it up incorrectly, it's going to tell you an incorrect story because it's not smart. It's just probabilities of math with the words. That's all it's doing. So it's just going to do its best, but it's all going to be based on what you give it. So the better that you understand the setup of it and how you're going to use it, the more likely that is to be something that is going to be pretty impressive with time. Right now, what everyone does is this insights stuff. And they say things like people in Japan who are likely to speak Japanese are more likely to be your buyers. And I'm like, that kind of makes sense because it's Japan, right? Like it's not particularly useful insight. Is it technically in the numbers? Sure, but that's not anything I can do anything with. But eventually, I think they catch up pretty quickly when they learn to tell stories with the data. And again, it's always going to be based upon how well that is set up. If you set it up incorrectly, it's going to give you incorrect results, right? So you got to be careful of that. So you can't just check out. You can't be like, oh, cool, I'm just going to put code on my page and then it's going to tell me everything that I want to know because it's not that smart. But with time, I think it will be because this AI thing is going to be game changer, especially for the white collar world, for sure.
Wow. Okay, good. Fascinating. Maybe we can think of a theme for the training, or maybe we even do more than one training, because that's really, I love the idea of asking, how was my day yesterday?
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
That's gonna be a little ways away. It's not there yet, but I can see that coming down the pike. I mean, I'm constantly doing that because obviously we're in the business of training this stuff. Right. So it's like, how is it going to one day? Is it just going to be like a, hey, Google, can you tell me how to do this? And it just goes, oh yeah, I just created this quick video. I made it up as I went. Here's how to do it all. Like I could see all that happening because all of those exist in different parts and pieces. They just don't connect quite together yet, automated, and it just takes time and everyone's trying to figure it out. But the way I look at anything with this AI stuff that's happening right now, this is like the days of MS-DOS. Some people are saying it's Windows. I don't think it is. I think it's MS-DOS. And if you remember the old days of having the green screen on your computer and typing stuff in.
That type code.
Yeah. Right. And you had to like, show a directory of your hard drive, C:, and all the other stuff you had to do. That's what this is now. And it's already that, at this level. Imagine when they put graphic interfaces on it and they get, it's rapidly evolving. This thing hasn't been out, 6 months publicly?
Oh, that's insane.
I mean, it is going to rapidly change the world in a lot of ways that people just can't predict at the moment, other than anything that you do with your head probably can be replicated in some way, shape, or form. And that's where I would look at anybody listening to this going, okay, is my job at risk? I'm like, well, do you think about anything during the day? Then yes, because that thinking process can be taught to this AI bot. If you can train anybody else to do your job, you can train AI to do your job, right? So, and the only thing AI does not have yet is hands. So anybody who's working with their hands, I think is pretty safe. Plumbers, not going to have too much of a problem. But if you're the plumber's scheduling system, you might. If you're the receptionist, you might, because that's just a phone call which ChatGPT can voice, right? Or whatever, can voice, set a thing on Google Calendar, plug it in, do all the stuff through API and tech, and doesn't need a receptionist anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm plumbing, it needs work. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to make a load of enemies now, but I used to work with when I started my life in real estate, I was an apprentice electrician.
Oh, there you go.
Don't worry, he said, don't worry, the plumbers, they don't think.
I'm glad you're getting those emails, not me. You're getting those emails, not me. That's awesome. That's funny. Yep.
All right, let's wrap up with 3 rapid fire questions.
Okay.
3 questions. The first of 3 questions, rapid fire. Probably asked you before, but life changes. What are the daily habits, Mercer, that you have that keep you productive and successful?
For me, it's constantly reviewing goals. So I have my goals written out a week ahead, a month ahead, 3 months ahead, 6 months ahead, a year ahead, 5 years, and 10 years, which I know sounds like a lot, but I've been doing it for a long time. So it's kind of a habit now. But I will constantly review those at least once a day because it helps me sort of role play. And the way that I do it, this is sort of the trick, and it's a weird thing for your brain to feel, is I try to remember how my future was 10 years out. So I put myself in that position. I'm remembering what happened for me to get there. And there are times where I will do that and solve problems where I'm like, next week I might be like, oh, I'm still working on blah, 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 whatever it is, trying to figure out what this new product is going to be. A month later, it's like, I couldn't believe how simple it was. Who knew trains were going to be the hint? And then 3 months in, I'm like talking about the product name that relates to the locomotive engine that is Google Analytics 4. And I'm like, oh, that's what I'm going to call it. And so it helps kind of get my subconscious helping me out a little bit with that process. That's definitely the number one tip I have for that.
Hardest lesson learned in business, I guess.
Hardest lesson learned is probably that goes to, somebody asked me recently what the best business advice was. I think it's the same, which is I was interviewing a guy named Frank Carney who owns Pizza Hut, started that company, well, doesn't own anymore, but started a company called Pizza Hut in the US, big brand, obviously all over the States or all over the world, I guess now. But he told me, he's like, I said, what's the one word, if you had to distill it, that entrepreneurs should do? And he's like, focus. They don't focus. They need to focus. And I was like, okay. So I ignored it for about 20 years. And then finally I'm like, I get it. For me, I thought focus meant, when you decide you're a pizza guy, you stay in pizza. And I don't think that was it. I think I misinterpreted it. It was, for me, my focus is teaching. I looked through the thread. It took me time to experience life and look back and say, okay, what's the thing that was the consistent thing I did through all my different jobs? When I was a sales manager, when I was a trainer, when I was in recruiting, when I was helping with building WordPress sites and teaching WordPress, eventually moving into teaching measurement, which we've been doing now for almost 10 years. It's like, what's the common thread? Oh, it's been teaching. I like that light bulb moment when I light people's brain up and they see something they can never unsee again that changes how they look at the world. I think that's amazing. And I will do anything for that. So that's sort of what I think was the best advice, and yet the hardest thing to do was to focus and understand the power of that.
Interesting. All right, last question. I already know the answer to this, but for somebody, I know what you're going to say. But the answer, for somebody thinking of looking at GA4, what advice for the first time? What advice do you have for them?
Get started. Get good enough to get going. Very, very important. You got to dive in and practice it. Don't consistently watch a bunch of YouTube videos. It's what we call riding the bike here at measurementmarketing.io. We say ride the bike. You cannot watch me ride a bike on YouTube, assuming you have no idea how to ride a bike. You cannot watch me do it. You can watch 1,000 hours of me teaching you how to ride a bike. The very first thing you're going to do when you get on your bike is fall off. Why? Because you have to experience what balance means. You cannot be logically taught it. Same thing with these tools. You cannot watch a bunch of people using these tools and understand it. You have to practice it. You have to practice riding the bike. So get started with the platform. If there's something that feels a little bit above your head, like even the stuff that we were talking about in this podcast, you're like, I don't even know about that. Like, don't worry about it. Just get started. Just know that stuff is there. And when the time is ready, you will be ready for it, right? You'll have enough measurement muscle to tackle whatever that new thing is that you wanted to learn about GA4. Right now, though, it's like, just get the code on the page if that's where you are. Then understand how to use the reports, right? And then you sort of just build it one step at a time. And then it gets better and better from there. But get started. It's definitely my advice with that.
Chris Mercer, measurementmarketing.io. An enormous pleasure. It's super good to see you again. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Outstanding. Thanks again for having me. It's been a pleasure, Adam.
All right, that was Chris Mercer, aka Mercer of measurementmarketing.io. I told you in for a treat from today's podcast. He really is the font of all knowledge when it comes to Google Analytics, and we use Google Analytics all the time. We install it on all of our client sites. We monitor what they're doing. It is, once you start using it, you can become quite addicted to it because it really can help you raise more money by tracking your prospects' behavior on your website and various other places, and then reacting to what they're doing so that you can improve your systems all the time. It's really cool. Mercer, super good seeing you. Can't wait for the training session. Thanks so much for joining me today. And of course to you, two dear listeners, I'm really happy that you were able to join us and that you're still here all the way to the end. Thank you so much. I will see you next time. And for now, this is Adam Gower signing off.